In this video, I'm going to introduce the Rowan Felted Tweed collection, which is one of the recommended yarns for several of my designs, including Homage to the Granny Square, Wallflowers and Tessellation Nation. These are all the colours that are available at the time of making this video, which is October 2025. I'm also including some of the colours that have been discontinued this season, because you may find that you can still source them in some stores for a year or even a couple of years after they've been discontinued. So don't discount them, but do double check that they are available if you'd like to use them. I'm going to be exploring the colour range and grouping them into little sets of colours or families, and also some colour stories. I hope that this will help you visualise the collection and the relationships between the colours. I like to use the names of colours rather than the numbers, as I find the names are just much easier to remember. We know that colours are rarely pure. They'll usually have a bias or a leaning towards another colour, or they may have different tonal values and different levels of brightness or saturation. So let's look at some red-based colours. So in this collection we've got Rage Red, we've got Tawny, which is obviously darker and it has more of a purple hue to it. And we also have Scarlet, which isn't really what I think of as a true scarlet, but it's more of a slightly oranger tone to the Rage. So those are kind of what I would think of as maybe the reds in the collection. So I'm going to work my way through all of these colours, and I'm going to begin by just putting them in groups based on what I think are their root colour or their base colour. So I'm going to pick out the reds, but I'm going to extend those reds into browns and oranges. So in this group, if I was looking for a collection of red oranges or red browns, I think I'd take those two out. They look a little bit too bright for this collection. I think these look beautiful together. I would put a tawny on the end of that, and that might move into a red. So as a collection of kind of reds and red browns, I think those work quite nicely. That's Ginger, Barn Red, Tawny, Rage and Scarlet. So let's look at the greens. I'm going to pull out everything that looks like it's got a green base. So I've got a group of greens here, and collectively we can see that some of them are natural partners with others, and some of them really don't work together very well at all. So let's see if we can start to group these together. So I've got a couple here which are very, very similar. So we've got this one lime green, this one apple green. They're almost identical. I would say the apple green is slightly lighter, and maybe the lime green is a slightly richer colour. And if I was looking for something to put these with, it would probably be this one, a very acidy yellow green. So that's Sulphur. So that would be a nice little kind of grouping there. Then there are the greens that are really quite desaturated. So we've got a dark lotus leaf green, And that sits rather nicely with the khaki. And I also think that sits very nicely with French mustard. So that's a rather nice little group. And I think I could put avocado in there as well. That would work. If I wanted a darker green, I've got a pine green here. That could work. So I think collectively, that's a nice little group. I think I could see those working together. Maybe with a dark pine green there. So they seem to have quite a close relationship with each other. So that's pine green, khaki, lotus leaf, French mustard. Let's take avocado. Avocado works beautifully with lotus leaf. So that's a lovely pairing. And then again, sulphur would look amazing on the end there. So that's a really lovely group of greens that have a kind of a natural relationship with each other. I could even put a dark green on the end there. I could put pine on there and that would still work. Then I think the desaturated, this is quite a chalky, it's almost like a pastel-y, greeny grey. So that works very nicely with the khaki. So that's a lovely pairing. And then perhaps the pine green would work with those nicely as well. So we've got 3 there and 3 there. The French mustard is an interesting colour because it kind of could go either way. I rather like it with these 3. I think it can work in a group with those, but then equally I think it could work very nicely with the khaki and the celadon. I think the khaki and celadon are beautiful together. They're like just versions of the same colour. And if I was going to be really daring, I could possibly put sulphur on the end there, and I think that could work. So those are those greens. And then we've got the kind of minty greens. So this is the discontinued Vaseline. Vaseline and electric green are amazing together. So that's a lovely choice. And then I think cucumber also works very nicely with those, as do apple. I think apple sits in there. They've got a similar kind of saturation level. So this is obviously yellower. But I think collectively they work really nicely, and I think lime would go in there as well. This one is a nice colour. This is like a pastel, a very chalky version perhaps of apple. So those are very nice together. I'm not sure if I would put this one with those, but I think it could work. That works beautifully actually. So that's sulphur, apple and sorbet. I think that's a lovely collection. So those are the greens. Let's look at the oranges and yellows. So the brightest orange in the collection is zinnia, which is quite a red orange. And then we've also got marigold and tango. So tango is like a slightly desaturated version of marigold. And I think those 3 work nicely together. So if you're looking for a set of oranges, they would work. And then perhaps if you wanted some yellows on the end of that, we've got options. We have mineral, which is beautiful next to tango. That's a really lovely pairing. And then we've got daffodil, which is just brightening that up. It's almost easing its way into green there. So I think if you chose to have mineral and you wanted sulphur I think daffodil would be a really lovely bridge colour. And I think those three work beautifully. So there's three really lovely yellows and three really lovely oranges as well. So collectively, they look fabulous together. So that's the oranges and yellows. There's quite a lot in the pink and purple range. So let's just have a look at those. So I'm going to pull out all the pinks. So some of these pinks are possibly verging into the purple. So I'm just going to focus on what I would think of as a pink rather than a purple. But we all see colour differently. It's very subjective. So you might say, no, that's actually a purple, not a pink. And we've got a very pale one here. And two very pale pinks. So let's just look at these. So if I was going to pick out ones that I felt worked really nicely together, this one's called Dusk, and I think that works beautifully with Candy Floss. It's got a slightly blue tone. This one is Frozen, which is similar tonally to Dusk, but it's much warmer. So it's almost got tones of orange in there, but kind of versions of the same thing. But I would put Dusk. I think either of them would probably work with Candy Floss. So that's Dusk and Candy Floss, and that's Frozen and Candy Floss. I think they could both work. But actually, I think Frozen works much better with Pink Bliss. I think that's a beautiful pairing. And then on the end of that, I would put Barbara. There's Barbara. So I think those three are fabulous together. So that's Frozen, Pink Bliss and Barbara. That's a perfect trio. And then let's have a look at these. We've got Fuchsia and Delight. So again, those are versions of the same colour. Fuchsia is probably more purple, but I think those two sit beautifully together. And we could put Candy Floss with those three as well. So that's a lovely trio of pinks. So I would say that these are slightly on the warmer side. These are slightly cooler, a bit bluer, perhaps. This is quite a grey pink. This is peony. So I'm going to look at that separately in a minute. And then I'm going to sit Dusk on the end of those. So that's Dusk and Candy Floss, Delight and Fuchsia. They're lovely together. We've got Heliotrope here. Heliotrope is really moving towards the purple, so I'm going to put that aside for a minute. And those are what I would think of as true pinks. So let's put those aside and let's look at the purples. So we've got a few options for purples. Now, I often get my purples and blues muddled up, so you'll just have to kind of bear with me with this. So I'm going to call that purple. That one's called Regal, so that suggests that that's a safe bet that can be called purple. Regal and Iris, absolutely beautiful together. So definitely work with those two. And what else do we have? Iolite. Iolite that could work with those. It's pinker. It's definitely pinker, but that would make a lovely trio. And then Heliotrope. I'm not sure about that. Maybe it could work with those two. Regal, Iris, Heliotrope. Perhaps it looks a bit pink though. And that one's, so that's Iolite. The other purples are bilberry. So bilberry, I'm not sure whether I wouldn't put it with those two, but I might put it with Iolite, possibly. I think it's a little bit desaturated. These have got quite a bright saturation to them, whereas bilberry feels quite heavy when you see it with those. But there is another purple which I'm struggling to find at the moment, amethyst. So amethyst is like a grade down, it's like a pastel version of bilberry. So those are beautiful together. And this is where I would bring in peony as well. So peony has a very similar saturation level. So they're all quite grey and quite desaturated, and they're beautiful together. So I think that's a lovely little trio there. And then we've got a few more kind of pinky purples that we haven't looked at yet. So there's Aster, which is one of the discontinued colours. Aster and Heliotrope, absolutely gorgeous together. Love those. And then Iolite as well. So that's a beautiful trio of colours. So Aster, Heliotrope, Iolite. And so let's look at the blues. There's a particular group of blues that are what I think of as denim blues, and they come in tonal colours. So there's Sea Salter, I think that's a true denim blue, and Maritime, which is a slightly lighter version of it. And then Scree, which is an even lighter version. So those three work beautifully together. You could also go really pale and put Alabaster on the end there. So there's two very pale greys. One of them is Alabaster and one of them is Clay. And I think Clay is the warmer of the two. So Alabaster I'd fit with those blues. And I think those are stunning together. Then there are the blues that are much more saturated. These are fabulous colours. So this is ultramarine. It's a really lovely vivid blue. And Pacific, which is a stunning sky blue. Even though it's called Pacific, I'm going to call it a sky blue. It's like a cyan, really bright, lovely blue. And those two work beautifully together. And there's also CL as well, which I would pop in the middle there. So that's a beautiful collection of blues. If you're wanting a blue that's slightly more saturated, a bit more dramatic than the denim blues, those would be perfect. They also move really nicely into the purples as well. So if I popped Iris next to CL, we could then start moving those into the purples. So that is a fabulous collection. So that's Regal on the end there. So we've got Pacific, CL, Iris and Regal. Absolutely gorgeous. Love those. Oh, and we've got ultramarine as well. So ultramarine, where would I put that? Maybe put that on the end there. But certainly all of those colours look like they've been designed to work together. So they would be a fabulous choice. We haven't looked at this one yet. Maybe I should have put this one in with the oranges. So this is Peach. And it does look stunning with the oranges and yellows. So we've got Marigold, Tango, and then Peach on the end there. Those are lovely. And then if we wanted to put something on the end there, we could add Camel. So we're just starting to kind of tone that down a little bit. And maybe we could add Stone. That's a lovely collection. A very warm, moving into the neutrals. And let's look at some different types of blues. We've got the blue greens then, what we haven't really looked at yet. So we're looking at the turquoises, and I'm going to pull out everything that I think is a blue green. So we've got pale versions, we've got deep versions, we've got quite desaturated grey versions, we've got one that's a little bit brighter here. So let's just kind of have a closer look at these. So we've got two quite dark turquoises, but they're very different. So this one's called turquoise, and it's quite a clean colour. It's a deep, it's like a sea green, and it's a really quite a solid, pure colour. This one is much greyer. This one's called watery. So I think they could work together, but I think with these, you would be looking at playing with the saturation levels of them. So going from something that's quite pure and it's not bright, but it's a very clean colour. Watery is becoming greyer. So what would I put next to that? I think that one looks beautiful there, actually. Delft is a colour that I often don't know what to do with. It's a very grey tone, but actually seen with those three, I think it works really well. So that's Deft, Watery and Turquoise. We could put a really nice dark colour on the end of that, so that's Bottle Green. So what would that look like? We've got Bottle Green, Turquoise, Watery and Delft. That's lovely. They work really well. And then we've got the slightly paler ones. So we've got Mint, Eden and Fjord. So again, they're doing quite similar things. I'm not sure whether I would put the Fjord in there, actually. I think they're quite grey, these two. They're quite desaturated. The Mint is like a lighter version of Eden. And if I was looking for something to put on the end of that, I might go with Clay, actually. I think that works very nicely. That's a nice trio. So that's Clay, Mint and Eden. So they're the kind of very pale, almost greyed out turquoises. And then Eden, where would I put Eden? So I've always really liked Eden with the two that are being discontinued. I really like it with Vaseline green and electric green. So yes, those are being discontinued, but I still think those are beautiful together. Let's look. I'm just going to look again at the yellows because there is quite a choice now in this collection of yellows, and they all do quite different things. I'm going to put this one in because I think sulphur can almost be a green or a yellow. And I'm also going to put cumin in there. So these are what I would say currently the yellows in the range. So we've got mineral and cumin, which work beautifully together. Cumin is like a desaturated version of mineral. Neither of them are particularly what I would call bright colours, but this is like a slightly deeper version of mineral. And then we've got daffodil, which is like mineral but a little bit greener. So would that work? I think that would work. So I think daffodil could be a bridge between mineral and sulphur. I think that's quite an interesting colour. And then cumin is really kind of leading into the browns. So if you wanted to take your yellow into a kind of a brown palette, then that would be the perfect bridge. And then, so this one is cinnamon. And then from cinnamon, we could start moving maybe into the browns. So this one is ginger. And then we could go into barn red, and that makes a beautiful run of colours. And then what we'll finish with is we'll just look at some of the neutral colours, because I think one of the things that the Felted Tweed collection does really well is neutrals. There are some really beautiful colours that are verging on the sludgy, but really beautiful and really important, I think. So let's just look at some of the greys. So I'll pick out everything that I think looks like a grey. And we'll just investigate. Okay, so we've got lots of greys here, and they're all doing slightly different things. So we've already established we've got the palest colours. So we've got clay and alabaster. So clay's slightly warm, alabaster's slightly cool. And then we've got this one, which is aluminium, which is a really lovely warm colour. And I think that moves beautifully into this one, which is rose quartz, which is sadly a discontinued colour. But I just think it's a beautiful colour. It's very interesting. It does different things when you put it with different colours. So I love rose quartz and aluminium together. And actually, the rose quartz also can lead beautifully into this one, which is amethyst. So I think that's a beautiful pairing. And then on the end of that, you could have clay. So that's gorgeous. And then we've got the blue greys. So this one is granite. And we've got the green greys. So let's just look at the granite. The granite and the shadow are perfect together. So that's granite, shadow, and that's aluminium. Those three are lovely. We've also got quite a greeny grey here. This one's bolder. So tonally, they're very similar. Online, they may look like the same colour, but shadow and granite are very blue, and boulder is very green. There's another green-based neutral called Ancient, and that looks beautiful with boulder. So I'm quite sorry to see this one go, because I think that that's a lovely pairing. And then we've got the darkest colours. We've got Carbon, which is a blue-based grey. Seafarer, which is a very dark inky, kind of like almost like an inky black, but it's not black, because you can see when you put it next to black that it actually has a very blue tone to it. And these are very interesting when they're used together. So that's black and Seafarer, and then Carbon, and then maybe Granite. Shadow, that's what I would do. Shadow, Carbon, Seafarer, black. Beautiful. And then let's look at the browns. There's a lovely collection of browns, and one of them is being discontinued. So Phantom is being discontinued, and this is Treacle. They are actually quite different. I'd say Treacle is quite a rich colour. Phantom is, how would I describe that? Not really sure. It doesn't have the vibrancy, I think, that Treacle has. So Treacle, I think, works beautifully with Barn Red, for instance, which then leads really nicely into Ginger. And it also works very well with Tawny. So I think Treacle, Barn Red and Ginger are a beautiful collection of browns, and they also move very nicely into the oranges as well. And I think that is the whole collection. So I hope that's given you a little bit of insight into the kind of the subtle colour nuances in the collection, because you don't always see that. It's not always easy to perceive that online. And then before we finish, I'm just going to pick out what I think are some really beautiful complementary colours. So colours that just look like they were designed to sing together. So we've got things like the really lovely sulphur, bright sulphur. Imagine that with these lovely bright purpley blues, and then you could introduce a little bit of pink in with that. And then maybe, how about if we had not that one, I think even just those, maybe a little pink in there. That makes a really beautiful complementary colour palette. Let's look at some blues and oranges. So we've got some bright, lovely bright blues, almost going into purple. That makes a lovely collection. Let's get a darker blue in there as well. And then we could have some of those lovely oranges in there. Not sure about that one. Not sure about that one. This one. So that's a beautiful complementary colour palette. And then if we were going to do some greens, let's look at the greens and what might sit nicely opposite those. So opposite green on the colour wheel, we've got reds. So we might have scarlet and zinnia. They would make a lovely complementary colour palette. And then of course we could do that with the desaturated colours as well. So let's look at some desaturated purples. So we've got amethyst and bilberry. And then if we were looking for a colour that was opposite those, we'd be looking for a yellow. But I always think a greeny yellow is lovely with purple. Could go really green. That would be quite interesting. Those two together would be rather nice. If you're lucky enough to have a yarn store nearby where you can go in and they'll let you play with the colours, that's always the best way to understand the subtleties of this colour collection. It's a really fabulous collection to work with, I think. And so yeah, I'm just going to continue playing with my colour palettes.